In this video, I want to talk with you about how to forgive someone who's hateful. I know that sounds really weird, but let's face it, it's easier to forgive someone who we can see good in, who hasn't been vile and hateful towards us. It's easy to forgive someone who's been repentant and truly examined their behaviors and has turned from their wicked ways. And yet God tells us to pray for our enemies and to forgive everyone. That doesn't mean that we re-engage with everyone, but it does mean that within our hearts that we are forgiving everyone. And it becomes really difficult with people who have engaged in outright malicious behavior towards us. So if we step back from ourselves for just a minute and remember the design that God has given us, that we are a mind, body, heart, and spirit, that is the soul. We're supposed to be disciplined in our mind and body, which is our physical flesh, and circumcised from our sinful flesh, living in the heart and spirit, because God was placed in our heart, and He is spirit, so He communicates with our spirit. And because the physical flesh cannot discipline itself because it is inherently undisciplined, and if we are living in the physical flesh, we're now vulnerable to the sinful flesh. Our physical flesh has to be disciplined by something, and that's where the heart and spirit come in. So as the heart and spirit are conformed to God, receiving His convictions in our heart, communicating with us through our spirit, from His spirit to ours, constantly working our hearts into conformity to Him, then our heart and spirit is able to cause the physical flesh to conform, to discipline according to the heart and spirit as the heart and spirit are conformed to God. Because quite frankly, when we choose to live in the heart and spirit according to God, the physical flesh must follow. The physical flesh must submit and be disciplined according to what is being done in the heart and spirit. So you're going to see this at work right now as I talk, as I share with you the process by which God takes me in order to forgive. God tells us that the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. When we're living according to the flesh, it's easy for us to start saying things like, well, this person did this, and then we have a judgment about why they did that and how terrible they are. And one of the ways that God pulls us out of the flesh, and one of the ways that we need to learn to pull ourselves out of our flesh in that particular situation, is to show us who we've been. When we're living in the flesh and we're recounting a story about another person, the way that they've behaved toward us, the reasons why they did that, so we're coming up with judgments, we can become very self-righteous. We can quickly forget all of the disgusting filth that was once a part of us. We can quickly forget that our righteousness is filthy rags to God. We can quickly forget that there's no good in us but the good that comes from God. That there were disgusting things that we did before God brought us to Him and caused us to be cleansed. We could not stop until God made us stop. That has not been of ourselves. As I was doing my work this morning on some resentments that I was feeling regarding some people who, quite frankly, have been very vile and malicious toward me. And yet I know that I can't go on. I have to be cleansed of this, and I have to engage in the work that is required in order for me to be cleansed. And so I began with the work that I teach you, doing the inner child and inner parent work. Again, not as the world does it, but as we do it according to the Word, standing on biblical principles, not as a practice of self. I began to sort through the feelings that I was having, and God began to remind me of my own sin, of some of the very worst things that I have done in my life that hurt people who I love. And as I was receiving His convictions, as I was considering what He was bringing to my attention, I began working my heart into understanding how it is, what needs to happen in order for me to forgive these people. What needs to happen in order for me to understand what's going on in the spiritual realm in this situation. And I realized that in the story that I was telling about these people, that once God showed me what I've done, that I need forgiveness more than they do, at least in this specific regard. And I began to realize how much all of us need forgiveness, And I started calling out to him and asking him to forgive all of us and to make us clean. And I began asking him to turn my heart from hatred to love and forgiveness. I began telling him that I can't do this alone. I need him to cleanse me. I need him to perfect me in love. I need him to make me good. But even as I did that, I had only passed from judgment to not judging. And so as I checked in with myself, I realized I've not passed into love yet. I don't feel love for those people yet. And I need to get to that place. And even though it's uncomfortable because my flesh is fighting against loving those people, my spirit wants to do this work. My spirit is willing to do the work. And so you see why it's so important for us to be living in the heart and spirit, the place where we are actually capable of doing this work in its fullness, doing it thoroughly, and not making it superficial. Not getting to a place where we're faced with our own sin and now we're uncomfortable. And so we just say, okay, I forgive them. We have to have a way of checking in with our heart and making sure that we've been cleansed, that there's nothing remaining that we need to do, that we need to address. Otherwise, the resentment and the hatred are going to keep coming back, and we will not have been made clean. We have to be perfected in love. So let's talk about what that means for a minute. God is love. God's spirit is love. So contrary to the way that we've thought about love previously, it's not something that is inherently part of us. This is something that has to occupy us. If it comes from God's spirit, then in order for us to really have love inside of our hearts, we have to have God's spirit. We have to become holy as God is holy, receiving his ministry and being perfected by his spirit, which occupies us, by the love which occupies us. We have to be washed in that, cleansed in that, which means that hatred has to leave. It has to go. We have to make that decision for that to leave and to be replaced with love. But it's not as simple as us just saying, Satan, get out of here, God, come in. It's not that simple. And I know that counterfeit Christianity tries to make it that simple, but it is not that simple. We've had certain experiences that need to be sorted through. We have certain pain that needs to be sorted through. Consequences that we experienced, feelings such as outrage and anger and sadness and grief. And so if we don't have a viable way to heal and sort through those feelings, if we continue to believe that somebody else, the person who hurt us, needs to change, and they need to hear us, and they need to validate, and they need to see what they did to us, and that we don't have the ability to do that within personal relationship, we're also going to continue to feel powerless and helpless. And a lot of times we don't realize that we're actually feeling that because we're so puffed up on our anger and pride, our self-righteousness and recounting the story, and they did this and they did that, which is part of the reason why it can be so powerful when we actually are faced with what we have done. God levels our pride by showing us who we've been. Part of what you're doing when you're doing the inner child and inner parent work is you're getting into that tender space within yourself. You're zipping off the world, you're zipping off the flesh that wants to pull you into self-righteousness and arrogance. And, children don't get into that whole story. Children get right to the heart of the issue. They hurt me. I wanted to play with them. You made me mad when you said that thing. They don't yet know how to judge. They don't know how to look at you and say, you did this thing because you're a terrible person. They've not yet been therapized by the world, which teaches us to make up a story around everything that people do, to give them a diagnosis for what they've done and who they are. You're just putting the focus on yourself within personal relationship, to acknowledge your feelings, to soothe your feelings, so that you can understand that you have the ability to do that. God did not design you to have to receive that from other people. He designed you to be accountable and then to turn to Him and receive His ministry. And as I was considering this question of how do I What is required of me in order to be perfected in love? I began to think about all that I've been given by God. So much forgiveness and love and mercy and grace. I was repulsive at one point in my life. There are things that I've done in my life that I look back on and I feel repulsed by, painfully repulsive. And I know that God held me accountable, that He continues to hold me accountable and remind me of the things I've done. He doesn't just let me off the hook. He doesn't just do the work for me that I'm required to do in personal accountability and repentance. So I know that God is just. I know that He knows what's good, and I know that He holds us accountable. And even though I can't imagine these people as good, I want that for them. I want them to be good. I want them to be perfected in love. I want them to be given the opportunities that I've been given to be cleansed. And if I was doing this work in the flesh, my flesh could not possibly acknowledge that or even know that that's actually what I want. My flesh would be too concerned with vindication that, by the way, I thought I was going to enact, that I wanted to control. So this is why it's so important for us to be doing this work in our heart and spirit by God's Spirit, because He's the one that I'm sorting this out with. He's the one who's coaching me and helping me to understand this is who you really are. He's the one who's helping me to circumcise from the sinful desires for self and vindication. And this is how He's perfecting me in love, because my spirit is doing the work to conform my heart to His heart. And so He instructs me and He reminds me that I need to keep praying for them, that I need to keep praying that they'll become good, that they'll be perfected in love. If I can think enough of myself and love myself enough to understand who I was and how I could not be better without His power changing me, and wish good for myself, understanding my pains, my lack of self-control, where these things came from, then I can comprehend how to do that with others, how to love others in the same way, how to realize that I don't know my own situation. I can't judge my own situation. How can I possibly know theirs? Nor is it my responsibility to evaluate another person's situation. God put me responsible for myself, and He told me that I have to pray for my enemies, give to them, and love them. So now as I am considering comprehending how to love others, that they are attacked, that they are in bondage the same way that I was attacked and I was in bondage, I can recognize that the thing that I hate is the spirit that's in them. As long as they continue to choose that spirit, I will rebuke them, I will dust my feet from them, but I will continue to work my heart into having compassion on them, understanding only what I understand from my own experience, that I could not be good. My righteousness, the best I can do in and of myself, is repulsive, filthy rags before God. So you can see that there's a lot more that goes into this process of forgiveness than a mere decision or whatever is being taught in superficial, counterfeit Christianity. God takes us full circle, showing us our own sin, clipping off the tentacles of the flesh that have tried to get into our heart, the desires for self-vindication. But we know that God is the only vindicator, and we have to trust that He's going to do things the way that He knows is good. Circumcising from holding on to this fallacy of power and control, of judgment and arrogance and pride, of wanting that person to pay, because those are desires of the flesh. Those are evil desires of the flesh. If we trust God that He's sovereign, that He knows what is good, and we give that to Him, then we can focus on what it is that we need to do, how it is that we need to be perfected in love, how it is that we need to circumcise from those desires of the flesh in order to get into the heart and spirit and know what the Spirit is actually willing to do. But a lot of the time we're so bogged down with the pain and the outrage and the anger. And the reason why is because God has designed us to resolve and learn from these things. He wants us to see how we've been hurt and how we have hurt others. We have to be built and we have to learn to understand as He understands. And so until we're willing to actually do the work to receive that, we're going to continue to feel those feelings, those terrible feelings that cause us to just feel pain, to live in resentment and hatred. And so many times when people contact me, they ask the question, why can't we just pray? Why can't we just pray and be healed? Why do we have to do this work? Why do we have to sort through our feelings? And I want you to understand that this is exactly why. God has designed us to be built by Him. He has designed us to resolve the things that He's sovereign over. He knows those things that we've experienced. He knows the people who are in our lives. And He wants us to understand as well the grace and mercy and forgiveness and understanding that's been given to us. And He talks about that in His Word. He says, whatever's been freely given to you, you need to freely give. Because in truth, we are supposed to become holy as God is holy. He's been telling us that ever since Deuteronomy. We have to become holy as He is holy. And so, as we realize and He convicts us of who we've been, and we see the grace and the understanding and the forgiveness and the infinite love that He has offered us, the compassion, the patience, we have to become perfected in His love. We have to become as He is and be occupied with that love. And just as perfect love drives out fear, perfect love is going to drive out everything else that is of the devil. Perfect love is also going to drive out hatred for other human beings. It's not going to drive out hatred altogether because God says, hate what is evil. Hate that spirit that's attacking that person. Hate the darkness that they're walking in and the bondage that they're in. But love the person just as God has loved us. Leave wrath, vengeance, justice, examination of others. Leave that to Him. He's the only one who has the capability to judge correctly. But it is correct and right that we would take the time to acknowledge and grieve the experiences that we've had. And I'll tell you something, that as we're grieving that, as we are truly seeing what's happening in the spiritual realm, why it is that God's people are being treated this way, why it is that that evil spirit that is occupying certain people who choose to continue to be inhabited by that spirit, why it's coming against God's people, that spirit is coming against the spirit in us. What might God be building in us? What might He be teaching us? Part of what He's showing us is firsthand that we are experiencing the hatred in the world towards His Son. We're also being brought into position because we once were evil as well. There was a time when we fought against Him, and we're being shown that when we fight against Him, how much grief that causes Him. And yet, even in the grief that it's causing Him, He looks at us and He loves us and He considers the situation, and He knows that that is a spirit in our flesh that is fighting against Him. And He just keeps disciplining us and teaching us to choose Him. As long as we choose Him, and this is a perfect example, I can continue to relish in the anger and the outrage and the hatred, or I can choose to sit down and engage in this process. I can choose to heal so that I can forgive. I can choose to receive His ministry and have Him put this in my face. Cause me to see the ways that I have lived and how I need His grace, how I need His mercy, to work my heart into the willingness of my spirit, rejecting the sinful desires of my sinful flesh and forcing my physical flesh to conform to the will of God. I hope that this helps to understand this process of forgiveness, particularly with those who are still evil. It's hard. It's really hard. We don't feel necessarily motivated to do this work, but it is required. And if we love Him, we will obey. I hope also that this demonstrates for you that the covenant is not this superficial agreement that, okay, I'll just receive everything that God did for me. This is a collaborative covenant. This is hard work that we do on a daily basis, a war that we're continuing to fight. So it's not reasonable to say that God did all the work. This is our work. And as it is, it's ongoing. If we believe, we will obey. Anyone can give lip service, but this is work that's truly done in the heart, and that's why we're going to be justified by our hearts, not by our lips. What's being taught in counterfeit Christianity are works of the lips, just lip service. And so it shouldn't be surprising that that is creating counterfeit Christians. My role and desire on this channel is that you will understand what it is to be a true Christian, what the covenant consists of, how to fulfill that covenant so that you will be saved. That's my role. That's my desire. That is the purpose for which God has set me apart. I would do no justice to him, number one, or to any of you if I just said, just make a decision and you're good. Just keep deciding that you forgive them. All a decision does is direct the way you're going to go. If you decide I'm going to forgive this person and I'm going to be perfected in love and I'm going to work my heart into loving them and doing what God commands, then you will engage in some behaviors. You can make a decision to eat breakfast doesn't mean you ate breakfast. You can make a decision to go to the store. There's a lot that needs to happen in order for you to go to the store. Thank you so much for listening. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video.